Good morning, everybody. I see a lot of repeat faces here and stuff from the last ones. Anyone that is new, welcome. This is our third in a series of 5 classes, Building a Better Nonprofit. We started out with governance, creating your leadership and your policies and procedures and just that overall, what are you going to do with your organization? Then we moved into organizational structure as far as now that you have that governance and that mission and everything and that overarching, now how do you put that into action using various committees and organizational structure, including reporting, agendas and minutes and little best known practices around that. Today we're going to move into the one that kind of keeps the wheels moving, which is fund development, the money to get the job done. Kathy kind of alluded to this earlier, and I kind of told Kathy whenever we got out of this one yesterday, this one is kind of opening Pandora's box. There is a lot here to unfold and to put out there. And so, they are going to do basics today. You might see some things that you're like, wait, our group also does this. We're kind of hitting the ones that we know organizations might struggle a bit with more and might need some more assistance in. There's definitely a lot more to this. Feel free, again, to utilize the chat to share resources back and forth. They're going to have a lot. Utilize the chat to share resources, put questions out there. I'm going to go ahead and start feeding the chat early with some key learnings from yesterday to get you guys thinking and talking. And otherwise, I am going to just say Kathy and Lois are going to do this presentation today because they have a wonderful introduction slide. Anybody that's new too, before you ask, we are recording this on at least by Monday. You will receive the recording, the PowerPoint, and the chat, so you can gather any resources from there. So with that, Kathy and Lois, take it away.
All right, thanks, Avis. Thank you all for joining us this morning. And I did want to point out, Avis says that this is an introduction, and it is an introduction, and we know we're missing some things. Please reach out if you want more info on things we don't cover, but this is a lot to cover in an hour and a half. So most of you, I think, know me or know me a little bit. I'm the program manager at El Dorado Community Foundation, and I live here in South Lake Tahoe. I moved here 25 years ago to teach at the middle school. And when I had children, I became a stay-at-home mom of 3 and started volunteering. And with the inception of the two-way immersion program, I started writing grants. Never written a grant before 2007. And now I get to run Zoom calls on how to write grants. It's great. But I think I tell you this because I think anybody can write grants and do the fundraising and the looking for funds for a nonprofit. If I can do it, you can do it. And my goal kind of is to be here for each and every one of you for whatever needs you have in terms of funding, whether it's grant writing, fundraising, sponsorship, and we'll go through all those. And then my cohort today is Lois Roberts. She has been with El Dorado Community Foundation a little longer than I have. She had retired. She is not retired anymore. Now she works for El Dorado Community Foundation and is our donor services coordinator. She will be doing half of this presentation because she is an expert on how to get donors and how to keep donors, which I think is the big crux. And she's really good with people, which I think is a skill set that you will see is really necessary in those parts. But I'll let Lois explain that more. So moving right along, here's our agenda. Our agenda is really heavy on resources for funding. We're going to show you the class objectives. In a sec, we're going to talk about these 4 resources for funding. We know there are more, but these are the ones not only that are often problematic for groups, but they're ever changing, right? You don't just write one grant, you're just constantly looking for grants. You don't just have one donor. So we thought we'd hit the ones that are constantly changing to maybe give you some new ideas or show you some places to get new ideas, and maybe hopefully you get at least a few things out of this. And then we'll finish off real quick with the board and the volunteers and the staff and their role in this development of funding. And at the end, we will have question and answer, though I'm noticing we haven't had to use that so much because Avis is on top of answering those chat questions. Please ask questions in the chat if we don't cover something. This presentation, more than the last two, there is so much to cover. I'm sure I'm talking way too fast, but I'm already looking at the clock. So ask in the chat. And I mean, honestly, Avis will interrupt me and stop me to say, Kathy, slow down, go back. No problem. I do not take offense. But again, this is for those of you that joined late, really hard to do. I'm a teacher. I look at people's faces and see how I'm doing. And I see none of your faces except for Nancy and Drew, you're in my screen right now. So I'm taking my cues off of you guys. The rest is all screen for me, okay? All right, here we go. So the class objectives, two things, resources and the role of the board. Really simple. We hope you get something out of these measurable for you to walk away with. And again, all this will be sent to you, the recording, the chat, the presentation, and you can always reach out to Lois and I. So last week, Avis and the bar she set with her dang car analogy that she managed to run through all the slides. We're not going to do that, but we have a picnic table analogy for you. Notice this picnic table. Notice also there's another picnic table, okay? So note that in the bottom corner. I'll get to that in a minute. So when we talk about resources for funding, I want you to think about a picnic table. The top of the picnic table, the sturdy table part that we all eat off of, or my children jump off of, is the organization. And the organization, the tabletop, stands there because of the four legs. And the four legs are your funding sources. And yes, of course, there could be other funding sources, but these are the main ones we're going to cover today because they are the ones to keep strong and steady and the hardest ones to do so. You have grants. They're ever changing, always around, new ones coming out, old ones disappearing. That is one of your legs, and that leg needs to be sturdy for that organization tabletop to stand. The second one is donors and or members. We'll talk a little bit about that. Third leg is fundraising, and the fourth is sponsorship. You need all four legs in this particular table to have a tabletop standing. If one of those legs disappear, the tabletop is crooked, falls over, plates of food, the potted plant all go down the tube. The benches are your staff, your volunteers. Those are the people that get the things done. They are also connected to these sources of funding. They need that. They can't do their job without your grants and donors and sponsorship and fundraising. And they support or give meaning to the tabletop. And lastly, you have the organization's mission and purpose represented by this plant. Hopefully, if the tabletop is upright and flat and the plant stands there, it is growing and flourishing. This honestly really only happens between your staff and volunteers supporting the tabletop and the funding. I did want to point out that other little picnic table. You could have a picnic table with 3 legs. You could do this with less than 4. You could have legs of 3. You could have grants and sponsorship and donors and not do so much fundraising and be just fine. But I would argue with only one of these sources, an organization is really going to struggle. So my first question, my first poll for you, it's actually a 2-pronged poll. In hindsight, I really should have just done 1, but Chris put it together as 2 for me, which is really nice. Which resource for funding that's in this picnic table analogy is your organization best at? And then you'll notice if you scroll down or if you click the next, you see the next question, which is which resource for funding does your organization need the most help with? If you could please pick. The 4 legs are A, B, C, and D. And then E is we struggle with them all or we rock them all. So the first question is asking which you're best at. And the second one is which one do you need the most help with?
See, Kathy can sit there and go, because we can see some of the data coming in right now.
All right, I'm going to give you a couple more minutes. I think about 5 more people, 4 more people need to answer. A couple more seconds, not a couple more minutes. All right. I think I can end the poll, right? Thank you, Chris. And I'm going to share. Oh, Chris shared the results. So this is very interesting. You guys are more dominant with your answers than the West Slope was, but very similar. It looks like what your organization is best at is grants and donors and membership. And some of you, a few of you, 1 in 10 or so, struggle with them all. And somebody out there rocks them all. Awesome. Maybe you should be giving this presentation. And second, the ones that you need the most help. Well, that's interesting. That's not what we saw last time. So I'm guessing those of you that struggle with them picked the ones that you need the most help with is grants. Is very even, but grants and donors, I was kind of expecting to be much lower. Fundraising is the one that most people need the most help with, but if you look at this, it's pretty even. So Lois, this is a little different than our last poll. So I guess I'll try to go really fast through grants so we have a little more time on the other ones. But anyway, thank you for sharing that with us. And we'll make sure we put things out to after the fact so that you have more information on all these areas. But moving right along, let's start with grants. So a lot of people would like a page of resources from me, like, where do I find grants? And I decided not to do that because that's really challenging. Every organization has different needs, has a different mission, and grants are easy to find literally with a search engine these days. But I did want to point out there's really 3 different areas to look for. Locally, here in Tahoe, we have a lot of nonprofit organizations, and we have the El Dorado Community Foundation, and we have the Tahoe Fund, as well as, we have all sorts of organizations that give out grants. Tahoe Women's Community Fund's grant cycle is coming up here in the middle of February. Community service organizations like Seroptimus. We have 2 Seroptimus clubs. We have 2 Kiwanis clubs. We have 2 Rotary clubs. One's on the Nevada side, but just over the state line. All of these organizations give out grants. Many of the service organizations give out grants throughout the year. You just need to look up their website and see. And then a lot of the funds, both here on the East Slope and around the county, have a cycle. And these are great organizations to look for, usually grants of 10,000 or less. Usually about 1,000 is the minimum, but that's one spot. The second area of looking for grants are businesses and corporations. And here in Tahoe, we are lucky again. We have a lot. Besides the banks, all banks give out money every year. They're looking for a place to donate. Look them up. US Bank has donated to the Tahoe Women's Community Fund every year as a sponsor, not as a grant giver, but they have both avenues in place. Wells Fargo gives grants every year. Vail Resorts has their EPIC program. They give grants every year. American Century Golf gives grants. All these businesses and corporations are looking to help in the community. Look them up. If you know somebody from the organization, call them up and find out when their cycle is. And the last type of grants you have are government grants. And a government grant is a 3-hour conversation in and of itself. But I did think I'd give you these links, which again, we'll be sharing this presentation, so you'll have them. Grants.gov are federal grants. SAMHSA are health and human services, basically grants, and grants.ca.gov are California grants that are run from the state level. There's a lot more involved in doing a government grant, but I would suggest if you think you're ready for that or you have a grant writer to go on to grants.gov, scroll through, create a login, make sure you record that login, and look around at the applications. Do always give yourself time with the grants from the federal government. There's a lot of paperwork. The nice part of federal grants is all 3 of these, all government grants, is once you've tried one, you have a lot of paperwork stored away in their system that you will be able to reuse. So the second and the third and the fifth are much easier to do than the first. If you think you're ready to take on that challenge, please email me. I'd be happy to give you some pointers. But again, in the hour and a half we have today, it's a little challenging to run through it all really fast. So let's move on to the basics. And since you guys, many of you are good at grants, this is probably not news to you. But there's 3 basics in my experience. 1, organizational information. It is essential that before you start a grant, you know the exact legal name of your organization. If I'm writing a grant for Tahoe Women's Community Fund and I write Tahoe Women's Fund, that is a big mistake because the grantor is going to look up the name. And if they can't find the name on the first shot on the IRS website or on the Franchise Tax Board website, you may not move on. Make sure the name is what it was legally filed with the state of California or Nevada, if that's where you're at, and the IRS. The EIN number that you should have, that IRS paperwork needs to be on file. If you've lost it, you can get a new one on the IRS website. Make sure you have the correct address, you know your mission statement, you have your website ready to fill it in on the application. And if you have annual reports, those are wonderful resources for you to draw from. And often on applications, they ask for a recent copy. And usually they don't require it. But as somebody who reads a lot of grants, we notice immediately who doesn't have it. Even if we don't open it, we can see who submitted an annual report and who didn't. And then lastly, make sure you have your budget numbers in front of you. That's the basic organizational information. Then there's project and program information. And I'm going to talk about this as a basic, but then I'm going to talk about the capacity building grants that we're going to be offering. So don't let me forget, but that fits in here. When you are answering information about what you're writing this grant on, if it's a project or program, make sure you can answer the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why, and be really specific. Now, capacity building grant that we're going to offer after these in April is similar. Even though we don't want to hear about a specific project or program, we want to hear about your organization and how, if we grant $50,000 to your organization, who or what specifically is going to be covered? When are you going to be able to spend these monies? Where are you spending the monies? And how is this going to, and the why is, how is this going to make your organization better? And even more importantly, why should we give it to you? What need are you serving? What need is going to be less of a need because this is a lot of money to give away? And then the last part of the basics is be the most awesome applicant. And most stands for be meaningful, be on point, be significant, and be transparent. Meaningful, your application should not read like a story about your organization. It needs to be meaningful in that you specifically talk about the need that your organization meets in our community. What is your organization specifically doing that maybe somebody else is not doing? Be on point. It's more like a science paper than a book. Don't be too short, but be efficient with the words. There's a lot of evaluators reading all these applications all over the place. They don't need to read 5 paragraphs if you can do it in 2. Be significant, show the significance. Show the significance of the difference, whatever the grant is for, is going to make. And lastly, be transparent. I think this is the biggest one. I don't think people mean to, but especially when it comes to the budget stuff, many people forget that we don't know the organization as well. And they often give well, here's what our organization does, but they're not transparent on where the dollars are spent. Maybe a good example would be like with this capacity building grant. Let's say you're thinking about, you would like to hire a web designer because the web designer is going to be, the social media expert and get the message out there. If you write that you want $50,000 for a web designer, that is really general. My first question in terms of transparency would be, well, what are they missing? Well, if they're hiring a web designer, who the heck's going to pay the benefits for this web designer? They haven't put that in there. If instead your application reads, we're paying a web designer $30,000 salary and using the other $20,000 for health benefits, for retirement, for whatever else is needed, the server that's going to cost money, whatnot, then it looks more specific and it's more transparent, because maybe you do know how that $50,000 is going for that one idea, but remember that you want to share that in an application. And in the bottom corner, I have a little comic strip. Very true. We fund only proposals we understand. If you have a less tangible idea, you probably need to spend more time explaining it. So besides the basics, uh-oh, that's not good. I went on the little joke. Grant writer, because miracle worker isn't an official job title. Poll number 3. Chris, can you bring that up? Simple. Are you awake out there? Do you have a grant writer, miracle worker, paid or unpaid? Yes, miracles happen for our organization, or what's a grant writer? Okay, got another 10 seconds. All right, Chris, I think we're close enough. You want to, oh, I think I can end the poll, can't I? Sorry, I keep asking Chris, but he keeps giving me power to end and share. Getting better at this. All right. So that's interesting. I think this is exact same percentages as on the west slope that we did yesterday. I think exactly. And there we had 90 people or 80 people on the call. So 60% of you have miracles happening. Excellent. Love it. And 40% of you, maybe you can reach out to me if you need some help, or perhaps you are doing it and doing a great job. But either way, we are happy to help. So what did I do wrong here? Okay. Next slide, maybe. Okay, so the last part of grant reporting that we're going to go over, so hopefully we're not, for the 60% of you that are good at this, will be done soon. You might not need these things, but the other 40%, maybe this is helpful. So there's 3 parts that I think of when I think of a grant. Most people think about the application process, which is super important. That's why we spent the whole slide on it. And then there's the actual ask, which is important, but there's 2 other parts of the grant that I think, especially smaller organizations, tend to forget. And in the moment for that particular grant, I don't think it makes that big of a difference. The problem is, as many of you know, if it's a small grant here in Tahoe, it's your reputation. And if you don't do the management of the funds and the reporting correctly, your organization is going to get fewer and fewer grants in the future. So first, the ask. The ask, what you're asking for, you should have vision. It should be a great idealistic idea, but it needs to be realistic. If Tamba, Drew, I see you on the screen. If Tamba writes a grant for $10,000 that they're going to repair every trail that was affected by the Caldor fire, yeah, that's a nice ideal, but it doesn't seem very realistic. But if specifically Tamba writes an application and asks specifically for 3 8-mile-long trails and is very specific on the ask, it seems more reasonable when it's laid out. Secondly, ask for what you need, not for what is offered. We're going to offer a $50,000 capacity building grant. And if you do good with those funds, you're going to get another $50,000 the next year. But if $50,000 is more than you can spend in a year, it will look much better if you ask for $42,500, because when you've worked out the amount you need for that website designer and it only comes out to 42.5, then ask for only 42.5. When we look at big grants, like big applications that go out like this one, we get a lot of applicants. Keep in mind that your number on a spreadsheet also stands out if it's not the full ask. It looks more fiscally responsible. And then lastly, with the ask, which I think I've hit on plenty of times, be specific, be precise. Don't ask for $50,000 for the general runnings of Tamba. Ask for $50,000 or $42,500 for something specific and lay it out in the application. Now, if you have a good ask and there's enough funds out there and now you get the grant, the management of the funds is equally as important as the ask. 1, read the grant acknowledgement form carefully. It tells you everything you need to know. It tells you about the timeline that you're on. If you ask for $42,500 for this capacity building grant, no, you have to spend that by June 30th of next year, all of it. You don't get to keep it and hold it over. It has to be spent. It says that in the form. It tells you what you can spend it on. It's going to be what you put in the application. You cannot choose to change that. You can ask, we'll talk about that in a minute, with an extension or with a change, but in the moment, the document that you're signing saying, yes, I agree to this, make sure you know what those bullets are. We can always tell that people don't read them because they often don't get to the bottom and fill in their address where they want the check sent to on our particular grant acknowledgement forms. That's a good sign that this person was super excited, signed their name and turned it back in. Please read what you're signing so you know what's expected. And then separate the different grants you get on different spreadsheets. Do not put everything into a lump account or a lump spreadsheet. Account for every dollar and separate it by grants. If you get $5,000 for Seroptimus for something that has to do with your website designer, and you get $50,42,500 from El Dorado Community Foundation for this web designer, keep those separate so that you can show Seroptimus how you spent the money, and you can show El Dorado Community Foundation how you spent their other dollars. Third, especially for the local grants and for the community organizations, the foundations, even some of the local businesses, make sure besides the grant acknowledgement form that you send back, that you send a thank you. The thank you can be a written letter, it can be an email, it can be a quick little video. The cutest one I got recently was a video from a group that dealt with kids, and they quickly videoed the kids all saying, thank you, we can't wait for, and then they had 3 kids tell me what. That was really neat. And you know, like I'm the program manager, I get most of those for the foundation, but keep in mind, there are funders that are supporting this. It's not my money. I send it out to the funders and the donors. This is making you stick in their head. This is making your organization. I remember exactly who sent that video. And if I'm the donor, that might make it that the next time around, you're that much closer to getting another grant or more funding. And lastly, with management of the funds, and maybe the most important, if staff turnover occurs, don't lose track of the grants. Google Drive is a blessing these days, but when you have somebody leaving, especially if it's a grant writer, make sure there is a list of grants, because there is an obligation to do reporting on grants. And if you miss those obligations, you're not going to get another grant, and you might even have grant funds recalled. And that brings us to poll number 4, Chris. Is this an issue for your organization? Do you have staff or volunteer turnover? Is this something that you really need to think about? COVID has really changed the game for a lot of organizations and made staff turnover more of an issue. But I'm just curious to see. We've noticed it this year. We've noticed that people don't often submit reports because they didn't even know the grant was out there. And keep in mind, your grant writer or whoever wrote the grant, it's their contact we have. So if they don't tell you about the grant, it's going to their email when a final report is due. So if you don't turn over the email to somebody new, or if they don't tell you about it, you have now a big problem. All right, so I think everybody's answered this, or most people have, and it looks like, Chris, it says fail to share poll. Are you guys seeing the results? Okay, cool. Okay, so about half of you have people that are coming and going, a little less than half. And there's somebody out there with what staff, what volunteers. I really hope whoever that is, you reach out to me. I would love to help. So for those of you that have people coming and going, really take note of this. Really think about what your process for moving on is so that this doesn't happen to your organization. All right, the last part of granting is reporting. And I kind of lumped this together: site visits, reports, and grant changes or extensions. So site visits, if you don't know what that is, it's kind of coming back. This is El Dorado Community Foundation is doing this for grants that are $10,000 or more. So for example, the capacity building grants will fit in here. We will be setting site visits up. We set them up a few months, 3 to 6 months into the grant time, so that it's meant to be twofold. It's meant to be for the grantor, El Dorado Community Foundation, to see what's happening. And it's also meant to be kind of a checks and balances for the grantee. So they can say, wow, we're already at 6 months. We haven't spent this money. We need help. Or to say, hey, We've already spent all the dollars. The site visit's supposed to be education for both. So we see that the funds are being spent, and for the organizations to say, hey, we need help with this, or this is going really well. And Avis and I did a few site visits this past fall. And I mean, they were so informative, not just about the organizations, but like all the great things that are happening out there. And I think it's helped us like present that information into the community. More and more people know about organizations because there's more and more media around it, but things like site visits really help also. So when you have a site visit, be prepared, know about the grant that you're talking about, be open. If there's a problem, talk about it. Of course, my phone is ringing now. Hold on so I can hang up on them. Well, I'll tell you what's really funny. Sorry, I'm hanging up on them. They're not good because that was Safeway. Remember the businesses I was talking about? I left a message with Safeway for a little granting opportunity for one of the PTAs I work with. Hopefully they leave a message. Anyway, and with site visits, the other thing is we really want, and every grantor wants to know if you need help. So when you come to a site visit, whether it's on Zoom, as it's been for a while, or in person, be prepared, be open, and ask for help. Then the big part of the reporting, know when your reports are due. As soon as I get a grant, I put it in my calendar and I set it for about 2 to 3 weeks before the report is due. So I know, so I don't need a reminder from the organization. It looks really good if you submit that report on time, following templates if they're given, and that you know when it is. If you reach out and say, is there a template that I need to follow? Because I know in my grant acknowledgement form, it said one was coming about a month before. You know, that is really professional. With reports, answer questions completely. Don't give 2-word answers. And the reason I ask for this, or every grantor asks for this, it makes it really easy for them to cut and paste. So if you say something like, we served 256 kids with, you know, whatever the program is, we can cut and paste that and put it in a different location versus having to reformat it so that the question and answer are there. Now, that being said, grant reports should be precise. Take only the questions, answer only the question. Don't write 5 paragraphs for something that can be answered in 1 paragraph. If asked, even if it's not required, pictures and videos go a long way. And then the last part is reports are very different for different organizations. Remember at the beginning, we talked about the community ones and then the business and the government. Government grants usually have quarterly or biannual reports. Some business and corporations don't ask for any report, and foundations and community organizations are very different. Many have annual reports, but some, like community service organizations, want you to come and talk to them about it. They might not even require anything in paper. Be sure you know which grant requires what. Now, if you get to 6 months in on your grant and you realize, wow, we're not going to spend this money, or we need to change this. We don't need a web designer. Well, we need a web designer, but we also need this, this, and this so the web designer can do their job. You need a grant change, or you need an extension. Ask, but ask early. There are so many organizations over COVID need more time. If your organization was doing a project for the schools and the schools were online and you had to be in person, there is absolutely no way you could spend the money that you were given if that's what the grant was for. Most organizations in the last 2 years only ask for time extensions when the final report is due. If you knew the schools were online 6 months into your grant, ask for the time then. It's much more likely to be granted, especially now that we move out of COVID. And if you need to change the grant, please ask for that early. Do not spend the money elsewhere before the grantor has approved the change. Some grantors cannot approve the change, and then either funds need to be returned or they need to be spent as they were meant to be spent. It's very professional and it looks very good if you are transparent. It's understandable that money can't always be spent and you are more likely to get other grants from those organizations and other organizations. I know in our community, one person can sit on 5 boards. People hear about it. Be professional about it. If you can't spend the money and you can't get a change or an extension, return the money. This is not, grants are very different than sponsorship money or fundraising money. They've been given to your organization for something very specific. And I think I'm not forgetting anything majorly, so I'm going to move on, and I think it is Lois's turn to talk about donors, the second leg of our picnic table.
Hi, everyone. I will not talk as fast as Kathy. I can't keep up with her no matter what. She did a great job. Thank you, Kathy. In the last course that Avis did, we talked about the importance of understanding who's responsible for the funding in your organization. And whether you're a working board, a governing board, a staff, or volunteers, everyone plays a part when it comes to donors. We're going to focus on the basics of donor development. Where and how will you get the funding? And when you do, what are your responsibilities for spending and reporting? But before we start, let's recognize the environment that we're in today. If you're an established nonprofit, you probably have a list of donors you can count on and fundraisers. So what happened with COVID, with Caldor Fire, with all the things that happened? Let's put up the next poll. Oops, where's the poll?
Breathe for a minute. There it goes.
There it goes. Here comes the poll. So the question is, where are you today? Do you have fewer donors, individual donors? Are you maintaining in numbers but lower in dollar donations? Have you been maintaining in numbers but higher in dollar donations? Are you growing in both? And other. We'll give it just a couple seconds more. I like seeing the growing in numbers and dollars. That's good. Even maintaining in this environment is good. So I'm going to end the poll. And let's look at where we are. So 39% of you say that you have fewer donors, and others are maintaining, but not in dollar donations necessarily. But the good news is 22% of you are growing. That's good. So let's talk. So now you understand what happened to you this year. Let's go to the next. Let's take that off and go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I don't know if this will surprise you or not, but 45% of nonprofits participating in this January study of over 1,100 nonprofits and 1,000 donors reported increases in the number of donors. So how could that happen? Well, I can tell you, our society underwent a new era of awareness of the comforts we were taking for granted. We were staying home. Media and government flooded us with the needs in the community. For those of you that did not see an increase, I think it's important to understand why. Were you able to provide normal services? So did you lose staff and volunteer support? I think recognizing where you are with your donors is real important right now. If you gained donors, was it because you were involved in assisting in the crisis? A good example is Hands for Hope. They capitalized on the Caldor Fire crisis by becoming part of the triage of services that were offered. They were able to provide additional support while giving the youth involved in their mission a positive focus. The result, good press, and we hope more future donors. Did you find that your staff working remotely put in extra effort while working remotely? This is an interesting paradigm that we all have to think about. I know our staff worked a lot of hours remotely in order to get the job done. And we're looking now at what does that mean? How does that impact our business? And how will we have relationships with our donors? So what's today's paradigm is the is the question. And we can't change the future without understanding our history. And we've got here now, and we need to realize that it was a major change. So let's look, and Tracker's up there telling you that, our little dog is telling you that we really do need to understand who our donors are. And the fact is that our demographics of donors is changing. We've relied for many years on the boomer generation, the over 60 age group, and they are declining. But there is a new age group that's coming that will be very supportive of us, and that's the 40 to 60 group. And they have very different expectations in how they are approached. For one thing, direct mail that is addressed to Dear Donor is no longer appropriate. Donors expect consistent and personal communications. The choices for giving have changed because of the internet access. I mean, how many of you don't know someone who's used the GoFundMe pages? Your communication strategy has to take this vehicle in consideration when you're looking at your donors. They are reading, seeing, and hearing about your nonprofit. We have to give more recognition to donors. This means using memberships, using recurring donations, being seen as a founding member can give great credibility to your cause. Allow anything that gives them recognition for what they're giving. If you've got one donor that gives $1,000 and you have another donor that gives $5,000, give recognition for that level of donations. Allowing members to give small amounts each month through a recurring credit card donation. Give them the convenience and a way to participate at a defined level. You get commitment and you get a more consistent income. And honestly, the credit union, the credit card usage has really gone up this year. The impact of social media plays a big part in this, and Chris is going to help us with that in his next training. I want to give you an example of what happened to us during the Caldor fire. Our director had in place a disaster plan that he enacted with the staff immediately. Within days, our website had a place for donors to give. We alerted every local media outlet that we were available to take donations and direct them. We made ourselves available for interviews. We reached out to the county services, the area nonprofits, and learned who could help and how. Within days, we raised $2 million. Over 80% of those donations came in by credit card, so online. This was not because we were an amazing staff, which we are, but because we were able to eliminate the barrier for the donor to give. The donors would see it on the news, go to the website, click and donate without leaving their couch. So it's important, I think, when we think about how the donors have changed, they want immediate availability. I think another learning out of that was making sure that you have the importance of having community contacts and keeping them current. If you don't have a database of that, keep a notebook, because as Kathy was talking about with grants, who do you reach out to when you need extra help? The branch manager at the bank, or someone in the county, and so on. There's a benefit to capitalizing on this new environment. I think we will look at our fundraisers differently. They'll be part in person and part in social media, like these Zoom calls. Think of it as an opportunity to add a different venue for reaching out. You can do both. And the donors that you are going to be reaching to are going to be used to doing business this way. Okay, next slide. So now we know who our donor, we've thought about who our donors are and how do we set goals. And I think nothing happens unless you set goals. As with any intention, you need to have a plan for retaining and building your donor base. That starts with setting a goal. The average for donor retention is 33%. That's not very high, but there are factors that you can do that can make that goal be different. If your main fundraising is an event that is not attended by the same donors every year, you're going to have more one-time donors. If your marketing was geared towards your mission and the donors are a result of that effort, your retention should be higher. The best way to retain donors is to bring them to you in support of your mission. If your event is all about having a dog parade and your mission is to support youth camps, you'll get a lot of interested donors at your parade, parading their dogs in their funny hats, but not necessarily supporting long-term supporters of your cause. So they won't come back and be those donors. So tie it to whatever you do, tie it to your mission. And never give a donor a reason to say no. Tailor your messages towards the positive impact of your mission. Pay close attention to your donors' expectations. I quote Bill Roby here. Treat your donors as stockholders in your company. They are investing in you now and in the future. That includes reporting back to them on how the funds were spent. So this is communication, and this is the hardest. Be consistent and regular in your communication. There are so many ways to show appreciation and touch the donors. It's okay if you only have time to pick one, as long as you do it consistently and with respect. I know we hear that you can't thank people enough. But in truth, if you thank them right and well, they will remember. So that tells us, that goes to my next slide. Please, next slide, please. So this is how we do it. Everyone worries about the ask, and what they want to hear is the fairy tale for the board members. As you can see by the cartoon, we want the wealthy philanthropists came and fell in love with Cinderella's organization, funded it forever, ever. And we want to hear that story again and again. That's obviously not going to happen to all of us. Storytelling has always been the best way to reach an audience. It's why we have movies and songs. We remember by relating, and by relating, we care. Storytelling should be used to train your volunteers, thank your donors, and of course, at fundraising events. The best history teacher I ever had in high school was Mr. Dobry, and he would literally act out the historical acts in the classroom. He had the attention of every student when he launched into swinging his sword and describing the battles. He made every historical moment memorable. You didn't forget it. So here are my rules about storytelling. The first one is, it's not about you. It's not about the storyteller. You're going to create a story about someone else or something else. And you have to choose a subject that's relatable to the listener, to your audience. So what will they understand? And I always put in ethical. It's important. We get, sometimes you're describing something that has occurred, and in telling the story, it might be easy to identify the person that you're telling the story about. And with it, and if you're going to do that, there are times when it's appropriate when we're telling a donor story, be sure and get their permission if you're going to use their name, or you're going to identify them even in a hypothetical manner. This is a small community, people know people, and I think it's important that you so massage your story if you have to protect the person that you're telling the story about. That's perfectly okay. It is a story. Connect it to your mission. So the reason for doing the story is to get people to understand what it is that you do, and make it simple and easy to share. This is critically important because that story is going to be shared by everyone, not just you. I'm going to tell a story about what I went to accept checks at fundraisers for, and so did a lot of the staff during that. And having a story to tell that the audience could understand and relate to. We gave out gift cards for people who had evacuated. And so that you had to tell a story about why that was really important. And the story that I had was that I'd heard from a young mother who had 3 boys, and they left during the middle of the night. She had to wake her boys up, and they had kind of prepared and had done some packing, and so they were somewhat prepared, but ran out to the car. When she got to Placerville, to the evacuation center, she found out that the youngest boy didn't have his shoes on. He'd run out to the car barefooted. So she needed money to go get him some shoes right away, obviously. But what really, the message in this story really isn't about the fact that he left his shoes. It's about the trauma that that little boy must have felt when he had woke up and had to leave his house, afraid of the fire, and ran out to the car in his bare feet. That's how you tell a story. You set the scene, you share the challenge, and then you wrap it up. And we all say we're afraid of the ask. Well, the ask comes natural if you're telling the story. Give them an example. I'm going to give you another example. I had a donor come into the office, and we were visiting about something, and I happened to be doing Crisis Angel Network grant. And so I shared the story of how great that was, that we were helping this young woman and what her need was. And that weekend, she was camping with friends. And around the campfire, somebody said something about what she was interested in. And she told the story about the Crisis Angel Network. And a camper who they had just met around the fireplace got up, went to his trailer, wrote a check. The next Tuesday, she came into the office with this check. She'd gotten a donation for Crisis Angel Network, just completely out of the blue. That's the importance of a story. Tell it so that someone else can retell it. That's how you train your staff. These stories might become in writing in your newsletter at some point, but they're really about training your volunteers, training your board members, everyone you touch, to understand what your mission is. So that's my encouragement. Tell the story. And of course, thanking everybody is really important too. Let's go to the next slide, please. Legacy donors. Legacy donors are donors who have stated that they will designate your nonprofit as a beneficiary of their assets. This preserves what you get in the future. So this makes sure that your nonprofit is going to be there for a very long time. So these are donors that usually donors that you already have, and they identify themselves. They will self-identify, and they're not limited to age. Don't think this is about somebody who has white hair. Almost everybody has a will or a trust, and some people don't have relatives that they wish to leave their funds to or their money to, and if something should happen to them. And generally, they'll come to you and tell you that they're interested in doing this if they're a donor. So it's okay to let them self-identify. I'll tell you a story of years ago at a credit union annual meeting. I told the story of how our founding professor of the credit union had gone around to the faculty collecting money he put in a shoebox to help other struggling faculty members. And that's how the credit union got started. Towards the end of the evening, I noticed this lingering gentleman, mostly eating more cake, and just walked up to him and asked him if he liked the cake, because it was from a local bakery. I didn't ask him if he was a member of the credit union or anything. And he said, "I knew Bob Coyle and remember him helping one of my friends. I'd like to move my money over to help." He self-identified, but he needed to be recognized. So what are common types of legacy gifts? Well, the easiest one is the wills or the trust. All they have to do to identify you in their will or trust is simply to say, "I bequeath X number of dollars or a percentage to the nonprofit, and this much to my heirs," and so on. So you're become part of their will or trust. It isn't really necessary for you to get a copy of that. What you do need to do, you do need to track it. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we do the tracking. The other kind of gifts are, one of the very popular ones right now is from retirement funds. People reach a certain age, they have a required minimum distribution. At the time that they take that minimum distribution, that money is taxable. So depending on their income at that time, that money is going to be taxable. And if they have a substantial income already, then it behooves them to donate some of that money or all of it to charity, so that to avoid the taxes, paying the taxes. It's simple as that. This has become very popular and usually comes up in the giving season between October and December. And so even advertising that you have that available, that's a good way to do it. Get the advice from a fiduciary on how to do the wording for that. It's not something that you want to just say anybody qualifies for, and that gives one of the things I would caution you is we don't give tax advice. We let the donor identify whether or not it is tax deductible to them. Another life insurance, becoming their life insurance beneficiary. So charitable annuities and remainder trusts, if you don't know what those are, they are a portion of asset that provides income to either the heir or to the donor during their lifetime, and then the principal reverts to the nonprofit. If someone asks you about charitable annuities and remainder trusts, get an estate planner involved. And if you don't know who estate planners or fiduciaries are in your area, give me a call. We keep a listing, and I'll be happy to refer you to somebody. But so if somebody starts talking to you about whether that would be a good idea, that's when they really need an estate planner to make sure that the paperwork is drawn up correctly. And then gifts of assets. These are things like land or stock. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I talk to you about the gift policy, which we'll talk about later. So donors may specify restrictions in these kinds of donations, and when they do, you have to track them. For example, we have one donor on file that passed away, and her donations goes specifically to a certain type of rescue dog, and so we have to find animal shelters that will funnel that money just for that. It's easy money to give, but if the donor puts a specific restriction on it, you've got to track it. Create a legacy society. So now you've got somebody who said they're going to do this, and you ask them, can we publish that you're going to do this? Because people look to see who else is giving to my organization, and it matters if you have a legacy. This is where looking at memberships would give that recognition to people, and you also want to remember that you're going to track these, but remember that they are revocable. So anytime during the donor's lifetime, they could change their mind and say, no, this week I'm going to give to so and so. But so I've got a couple of real basic rules. Don't give tax advice. Please call me if you need assistance, if you need help in getting somebody a little bit extra advice. We can sure do that. And then there's I'm not a lot for, oh, by the way, you don't, and when it comes to this, I think somebody's asked a question about tracking these. You don't book these. You don't put, it isn't recommended that you put these dollars. Let's say somebody comes in and says, I'm going to put you in my will, and there's going to be $2 million when I die. Don't put those on your books. Track them off books. As I said, they're revocable. They're not dollars that you can spend today, but they're wonderful gifts to help your organization stay in place for a long, long time. And then my other one is that I'm not big on written brochures anymore. I think people have kind of gotten away from those. But in this case, for legacy donors, I truly recommend that you have a brochure that you can leave at advance and visits. And the reasons is that this is a passive invite. This is something where they'll pick up the brochure. They'll say, I'll think about that. And we do probably need to update our will. And that piece of paper will help them. So I recommend that you have a brochure. And if you want examples of that, for heaven's sakes, give me a call. And also, don't be afraid to plagiarize. There's a lot of organizations out there that have them. Take a look at what other people are doing and use them. So now I think it's off to Kathy again. So take a deep breath, because she's going to talk really fast.
All right, so let's start with a lighthearted comment. We're going to talk about fundraising and sponsorship kind of together as the last two legs of that picnic table. And of course, we all know that the right attitude is the key to fundraising. So I have another poll here, Chris, if you could bring that up. Take a second and think about your organization that you're representing and what is the biggest challenge with fundraising for your organization. And I know some people want to answer 1 and 2 together, but try to pick your biggest. Is it finding the people to organize it, to execute it? Is it coming up with creative ideas for fundraising? Is it finding dollars to put a fundraiser together? Or are you one of the lucky ones who have it down? And if you do choose the last one, I hope you will consider sharing a tactic, a strategy, something that works really well for you, so that other people have some ideas that maybe they haven't thought of before. All right, Chris. Oh, I can end it. Sorry, Chris. I keep asking you to. And share the results. Oh, it won't let me share. I think somebody else is. Thank you. Okay, so it looks like, wow, coming up with creative ideas is the hardest part for most of you, though it's not a high percentage. And then the other two are the organizing and executing. And again, who's that soul who has it down? I love it. Keep it up and share some ideas with us. So let's talk about that a little bit, about the organizing and executing and creative ideas, and hopefully give you some ideas. Fundraising, passionate committee, other people besides a one-man show is really important. If you don't know who to reach out to, look at some of the people who are on your board, if you have a board, some volunteers, and look for, if you have donors, sometimes donors want to help with that. Find people who really support your mission. Put an email out, ask around. Don't put people on the spot, but make it open-ended. And sometimes to create the passionate committee, you need a timeline. You need to show what exactly you're trying to do with the fund, maybe the whole idea or a specific fundraiser. Show a list, make jobs look reasonable so people want to help. Easy, small example are PTAs. PTAs, all they do is fundraise for the school. And often it is 2 or 3 people running the show, and it's really challenging. But you have this almost member base with all these other parents out there. And I've really found over the years that it's overwhelming for many people. Those of you that are on this call, you're the leaders of the community and you've taken it on and you don't need it explained so much. But in terms of a fundraiser, or the idea of fundraising for an organization is overwhelming for many. But if you can create a timeline, if you can show whether it's one fundraiser and we are going to use these 2 months to prepare, or 3 fundraisers over the whole year, and here is how it lays out. And then below the timeline, you show what the jobs are. You don't make somebody think they're in charge of the beer fest. But within the beer fest, you need one person who will contact 10 beer vendors. And here are the names of the beer vendors. And oh, I'd like you to look up the phone numbers. And for another person, it's to create the flyer or the social media posts. But if you make the job small and reasonable, it's easier to find people to step up and help. Create a realistic budget and plan. I don't think I have to talk too much about the budget, since it looks like that doesn't seem to be a concern for many of you. And then lastly, be creative. Think beyond dinners. I write that, but on the other hand, we're coming out of COVID, and sometimes dinners and the festivals and the festivities we have in the town are what people are looking for. But beyond that, think about the virtual events, think about membership drives, and think about silly little fun activities. For example, virtual events. I don't know if you have attended any of these, but I attended recently a wine tasting virtually. There were 2 ways to sign up. The more expensive way was if the wine was shipped to my house. The cheaper way was if I went and picked up the wine. I paid for the 3 bottles of wine, and then it was a Zoom call with about 50 people, and the wine connoisseur, I don't know what the name of these people are, I'm not very wine connoisseur-y, went through and talked about it while we sat on Zoom. We had a great time. The organization made, you know, a certain amount, and they had changed their 2 prices based on whether we were picking up or they were shipping, so that they didn't lose money on the amount we were donating to the cause. There's many virtual events out there. If you Google them, you will find some creative things and very different ideas depending on what part of the country you look at, but it's not something we couldn't try here in Tahoe. Membership drives. So Tahoe Women's Community Fund is a completely member-based organization. And the members that sign up there, I see many of you on this call are members. The only thing you get besides putting the money in to give it back to the community is a vote. Now, other organizations don't have that ability, right? Nancy at Lake Tahoe Community College Foundation cannot promise a vote to her members. Her board might not be really happy with that. But I would argue that the foundation could put a membership together of people that just want to know more about the foundation or LTCC. And maybe instead of returning for your membership a vote, Nancy finds a way to create a newsletter that the members get. And of course they can disperse it out. But if the newsletter is what the members are receiving for their membership, she's giving them something for a group of people who might otherwise want to participate anyway because they believe in her mission. But by giving them a little something and calling them members, people like to belong. People want to be part of a community. It is an easy way to have a little fundraiser. And if it's an annual membership, just like the Women's Fund is, it's something that people renew, and it's an easy, and we'll talk about this with sponsorship, to keep those funds coming in. It's another source of revenue. And lastly, fun activities. I gave this example yesterday because I just saw it. A little tiny organization, the basketball team at the high school, the girls basketball team at the high school has a little nonprofit, and they did a free throw-a-thon. They raised thousands of dollars because we are all fools and think the girls aren't going to make baskets. I don't know. But it does not mean only the basketball team can do a free throw-a-thon. Think about using that with your donors or your members. Right now, people are looking for things to do. Some other a-thon can be done with adults. It can be done with children. We can do it now. I've already thought about how to do this with the Babe Ruth League that I help with. Why not create some other thing that includes the kids or includes the families to create a fun activity that gets people out and about. If it needs to be in an outdoor space, put it in an outdoor space, but make it something that people just want to come to because it's fun. And if you need ideas on creative events, talk with each other and think about putting fundraisers together with another organization that might have a similar or even very different mission than yours. If Nancy, I can see you on the screen. So if Nancy gets together with Cheyenne with, Cheyenne's got Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless, that's your thing today, but perhaps you can do a fundraiser together. Nancy has the location, Cheyenne has the food and beverage component, and you two have completely different email lists to send out or different social media posts to put out to different groups of people and share the profits. It's another way to get other people who don't have similar ideas involved, or find people who have, you know, if two organizations are involved in youth, put a youth fundraiser together and share the profits. But it splits up the work. It finds you those passionate committee members, and now you only have to find half of them, and think about how you can work together. And last but not least, and don't forget that if you're not working together, to always look, and I think people in Tahoe do that really well, but make sure you're not conflicting with other events. I think that is the biggest downfall. And if you are conflicting with an event, that would be the time to reach out. See if the event can be done together or side by side. You'll end up with more people there, more fundraising for both organizations. And then last but not least, as Lois said with the donors, do not forget the thank yous. And along with the thank you, if you think about it, Jude, I'm going to pick on you. I don't even know if you're on the call, but I know you do an amazing job with this with the Brewfest. When I heard about the Brewfest or got the thank you for the Brewfest for attending, there was already a date for the next one on there. And I think this was a couple years ago. And I don't know if that's changed with COVID, but I was so impressed. If you know when the next time you're going to do the membership drive or the free throw-a-thon or the Brewfest or the festival or whatnot, put it on the thank you. Get it on people's calendars so that they know it's already there. So moving on to sponsorship, which is very tied to donors and fundraising. Sponsorships are often the member drive for businesses and corporations in the community. It can also be community members. Community members might want their name on something as a sponsor. For those of you that are Tahoe Women's Community Fund members, our only thank you to sponsors, to people who have said, we will step up and help you with your organizational costs. All they get from us and all they seem to want from us is an email banner. Every email we send out has a banner of sponsors, and our sponsors are local businesses and community members. We have community members who choose to put their money in our unrestricted account. It works so well for us, and they have their name on every email. And of course, when we have dinners, we do thank our sponsors, but with COVID, we haven't had that. Second, give credit whenever possible. Every email we put out has our sponsors on it. Every event we do mentions our sponsors. We have them stand up if they're there. Give them credit because you want them to come back. Make sure the sponsorship is annual or even biannual it can be, but make sure there's a deadline on your sponsorship. Make sure people know how long they're sponsoring for. And once you have that set, if you look at the next bullet below, make sure when you're emailing them to ask to renew, you're giving them plenty of time. So with the Women's Fund, easy example, at the beginning, we had sponsorships picked up throughout the year, and slowly over time, we moved it to one time of year. In October, we are getting sponsorship funds for the next year. We send out the first email in August. We send out the next email in September. Do you still want to renew? If so, and we also leave the option open of when is the best time for you to renew. For a small business, maybe the fall is a terrible time to renew because that's their downswing. Hey, if they want to pledge to give the money in December, that is just fine. But think about making a renewal date and then keep those same sponsors. Make them feel special for what they're doing for your organization. And lastly, obviously, share your passion about the organization. If they know how meaningful it is, if they understand the need that your organization is meeting, it is an easy ask. Just like for individual donors or individual members, a sponsorship is that ask that needs to come. And it's easy to do if there's passion about the organization that is obvious. And it also doesn't always need to be the executive director or the person in charge. It can be anybody that's willing to help, whoever has that connection with that possible sponsor. Sponsorship and fundraising, I think, are the ones that take up the most time in terms of getting set up. But something to think about is that once you've started a fundraiser every year, it's easier. Or once you've started getting a sponsorship from an organization or a business or a community member, it's easier to retain. So when the time is right for your organization, spend some time, put a committee together to do that, and know that over time, it's a little less work. So we have about, just like yesterday, Lois, you have like 10 or 15 minutes to talk all about our second objective of how the board and the volunteers are involved. So Lois, you're going to talk reporting requirements first.
You did a great job. So it's perfectly okay. So I'm going to talk about what we have to do and what we don't have to do. So cash donations, assuming you're a qualified 501(c) or you're operating as a component fund under the El Dorado Community Foundation's 501(c), the donations you receive are considered charitable gifts. The expectation of the donor is that they will receive a receipt for their donation that they can use for tax purposes if applicable. It's not a requirement, but an opportunity to track your donor and show your appreciation for their donation. Donors do need a written receipt for donations over $250 if given in 1 year, so they can have it for their reporting for their taxes. The foundation's policy is to give an acknowledgement of the donations for every online donation, credit card donations, no matter what the amount is, and all cash donations over $50. We do use computer-generated letters, however, they are personalized. We recommend that in addition, even if we're doing that for you, that the nonprofits also send thank you notes or make personal phone calls thanking the donors. Remember, this is another opportunity for you to tell your story, reminding them of your mission, letting them know that they made a difference. The receipt should identify the nonprofit by name, the donor by name, the description, and the amount of the gift. I've actually added to the screen here a sample tax acknowledgement language. And again, I'll caution you that we don't give tax advice. We don't know whether this is tax deductible for the donors, but so we have a statement in there that it's up to them to determine that. Okay, you can go to the next, but feel free to copy this language, that's fine. So the other type of donations that we get are gifts of, these are to be treated just almost like cash donations, but they're in kind. So they're the people who give you things to use at your silent auction or any kinds of goods and services that have a fair market value. I want to give you some examples. For example, if you get what you would be acknowledging or giving a receipt for an in-kind donation. If you get 12 bottles of wine donated for your live auction and purchasing them at the winery would cost $250. At the live auction, if the bottles raise $1,000, the in-kind donation receipt can only be for $250, the fair market value or the retail value. A question was asked yesterday whether or not you needed to determine the fair market value. You don't have to do that. You can simply make sure that in the donation receipt that you include the name of the event and the goods that were supported. So the other example I would give you is to kind of exercise care when you're giving any documented benefit to the donor. An example is a sponsor for an event gives you $1,000 for your golf tournament. For that sponsorship, you give them 4 golfing tickets to play that valued at $100 each. Your receipt should reflect the donation of $600, not the $1,000. So those are kind of things you have to watch out for if you're actually going to disclose the fair market value in the receipt. Avis, did I see a question pop up there I needed to answer?
The question was, and I was starting to write a response, but I'll let you take it. It was, what is the importance of tracking in-kind donations? Why do I need to do it?
Oh, that's an easy one. It's because let's say you're getting it donated from a winery. The winery actually can include that in their charitable deductions in their tax reporting, and it gives you what? Another opportunity to thank the donor. So next year when you go back, or even after, thank you for an in-kind donation for an event, I would always include how much the event raised and the good that it did, because you're going to go back and ask them again next year. So I think there's a real value in doing the acknowledgements.
Well, and Lois, isn't it also considered, in some cases it's considered an asset, right? Part of your assets for your organization. So for instance, I know during COVID, a lot of our organizations got donations for masks and things like that for them to keep their organizations up and going. Would that be considered an asset on your books or not?
No, it would not.
Okay, no, thank you.
You don't book them as an asset.
Got it. But I did see that I believe somebody put in the notes that, it is looked, if you're, it's part of your audit a lot of times.
Yes,
and stuff.
Absolutely. Yes. You need to maintain it for audit purposes. You need those receipts. And that's true of all of your tax receipts that you're doing. So and it doesn't necessarily have to be the exact letter, but your process, your policy, and how you treat it, you should document and be able to show what you did.
Awesome. Thanks, Lois.
We're less paper sensitive now in storing that kind of data. So it's not necessary to have the physical copy of the letter in the file. In the case of in-kind donations, we do, it is the foundation's policy to keep those because they're a little bit, they're considered pretty much off book. And so we keep a notebook of them so that we have to refer back to them or we asked. Next slide, please. Okay, we've talked a little bit about the kinds of boards that you have, and this really comes under the issue of policy. It's not whether how you're training your board, but rather what is the mission of your board, and are they a giving board, and why is it important that they be 100% contributors? And I think the key here is, the reason is not so much because of the monetary thing that they bring or the services that they bring to your board, but because they share your passion and they'll be available. By sharing their passion, and they do have a fiduciary responsibility. So setting policy and staying fully informed is something that is a responsibility that you have to make sure your board does. They're your best advocates. Just being able to say, I'm a supporter and a donor because, and you've armed them now with the story and the level of pride in your organization, that's great. But it also brings consistency to decision making, and that's what the board's role in development is. Go to the next slide, please. So this is probably the most important thing that they have to do when it comes to donors. You do need to have a gift policy, and the gift policy is really saying, what kind of gifts will you accept? If you'll only accept cash donations, that's pretty simple. If you will not accept restricted gifts, which means I'm going to give you a gift, but I'm going to say you can only use it to buy file cabinets, but you're not going to go, then you have to say, you have to track that money and make sure it is only given for file cabinet. It's only used to purchase the file cabinets. And if the money, if you don't spend the entire thing on file cabinets, you have to give the rest of the money back to the donor. So that's important. So your gift policy needs to address how you'll handle whether or not you'll accept restricted gifts, and if so, under what circumstances will you do it, and how will you track it? And then, can gifts be land or fixed assets? Will you accept, I referenced artwork earlier. It's pretty common for a donor to want to give something to you that is land, or maybe they want to bequeath their house to you. You need a gift policy that says, I'm going to turn that land, that stock, into cash immediately, and that's what I'm going to book. And that's part of your gift policy, saying that's how you're going to manage those funds. If it's something where you're going to get land and you're going to maintain it, you need to talk with your board about whether or not you want to set up that under a different, like an LLC or something, and so that it's not part of what you do. So the gift policy has a lot of meat to it that it has to decide. Your board really needs to decide what you want to do, what you'll do if you get tangible gifts. If somebody gives you artwork, do you sell it? Where do you store it before you sell it? All those things have to be decided in your gift policy. There's an IRS publication that covers this. I've also, in the chat, I know Avis will share the two sources I have for gift policies. There's ours, we can give you our sample gift policy, plus the Council for Foundation for Nonprofits has a sample template out there that I suggest that you use. The other responsibility board role in development is tracking success, and this falls back pretty much into your fundraisers. When you have a fundraiser, we always charge out with a goal of we're going to raise $10,000, but the board should be deciding in advance what they're going to allow, looking at a budget for the fundraiser and say, I think when we do this fundraiser, I'm going to allocate 20% to general needs of our nonprofit and the other 80% to program. If you're going to do that, that's important that the board decide that up front, and that's how you manage the money that you take in, and it needs to be tracked. That's part of their responsibility, their fiduciary responsibility. And then I say track success. This celebrating what we can do, what we've accomplished, what we do, is certainly the board's role in development. And if you've armed them with the stories, it'll be easy to celebrate if you've given them a budget and you said, this is what we did, recognizing that this was successful or not successful, and how you make your plans going forward. That's the fiduciary responsibility of your board. And then we celebrate the success. And I'm now going to celebrate that this is the very last slide and you don't have to listen to me anymore.
All right.
Thank
We
you.
made it in time. We have 4 minutes left. Is there anything we forgot? I want to remind you that all of this is going to come out Monday at the latest, the recording and the presentation and the chat. And the chat will show all the different resources that, like Avis just finished up. If there's anything we can help you with, Lois and I are both, our emails are up here, but that's our job, right? Our job is to help create a better community, and a better community really looks better with all the great nonprofits. I mean, I've said it a million times, but the reason I continue to live in Tahoe is we are quite a community. It is shocking how many nonprofits serve just the South Shore of Tahoe. And that is kudos to you all for stepping up to do such an amazing job.
Awesome. And, yeah, just yesterday we were talking about, actually we had a board meeting ourselves and it said, hey, are you charging the nonprofits? And we're like, we are, it's their time and stuff. So we truly appreciate you guys for being here today. Again, if you aren't registered, the 4th one in the series next week will be around marketing and communications. It will be delivered by Chris Ringness, who is our own internal marketing and communications guru at the foundation. And just a little teaser to get you guys there. I know Chris has a couple of special guests that are specific to West Slope and to East Slope. So you won't want to miss his, because he does have a resource coming in to assist him next week. So that's really good. If you haven't registered or you're not the right person that needs to be registered, just get online to our website and register that. And again, this was a big one today as you guys chew on this one. Any questions? Yesterday, I know Lois got questions about an hour or two afterwards of people things started to sink in. If you're like me, you're a processor. So something might hit you in an hour or two. Please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, everybody, have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay well, and we'll see some of you next week. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.